In the sprawling icy expanses of Zarithia, a breeze whistled through the towering ice structures, echoing a haunting melody unique to this frozen world. Lyria, a young Borealix, moved gracefully among the ice sculptures that dotted her village, her skin shimmering like the facets of a diamond under the pale sunlight. Her people were adapted to the cold, their bodies never feeling the chill that any off-worlder would find unbearable. As she carved delicate patterns into a newly formed ice block, a shuttle descended, stirring the powdery snow into swirling eddies. She watched, curious but cautious. The hatch opened, and a figure stepped out, contrasting sharply with the pale world. He was bundled in a thick, insulated suit, hood drawn tight against the cold. Tom, noticing Lyria's gaze, waved tentatively. "Hello there," he called out, his breath visible in the frigid air. Lyria approached, her steps measured. "Greetings, off-worlder. What brings a human to Zarithia?" Her voice was melodic, almost singing with the accent of her alien language. Tom grinned, pulling back his hood to reveal a warm smile. "I'm here with a research team. We're studying the mineral properties of your planet." "I'm Tom, by the way." "Minerals," Lyria echoed, tilting her head slightly. "Our ice does hold many secrets." "Exactly," Tom replied, eager to share his passion. "I specialize in geology. Your planet's ice and rock formations are unlike anything we've seen." Intrigued, Lyria set down her carving tools. "I am Lyria. If you wish, I could show you some of our sacred sites where the ice forms in ways said to tell the future." "That would be incredible, thank you." Tom's eyes lit up with excitement. Together, they ventured deeper into the village, passing other Borealix who eyed the human with a blend of suspicion and curiosity. Lyria explained, "My people are not used to visitors, but seeing we can learn from each other, they will accept your presence in time." Tom nodded, understanding the delicate nature of first contacts. "I appreciate your help, Lyria. I'm here not just to study, but to build connections. Maybe our people can help each other." As they walked, Lyria showed Tom the ice library, where ancient knowledge was preserved within massive ice blocks. Tom marveled at the technology used to encode data in frozen water, a concept both alien and fascinating to him. "The cold preserves all," Lyria said, her hands brushing over a particularly intricate ice tablet. "Our history, our sciences, our arts." "Amazing," Tom murmured, his gaze respectful and keen. "You've adapted to utilize your environment in ways we're just beginning to understand." "Yes," Lyria agreed, her eyes reflecting the deep blues and purples of the ice around them. "And perhaps, by sharing, we can find warmth in knowledge." Their laughter echoed off the ice, a sound as crisp and clear as the air around them. Tom's presence, his curiosity and respect for her culture, warmed Lyria's heart more than she expected. For the first time, she considered that there might be more to learn from the universe than the cold alone could teach. Chapter 2. The Arrival. Tom's shuttle, now cold in the shadow of the towering ice formations, served as a temporary base for the human research team. Inside, the warmth and hum of machinery contrasted sharply with the silent, frosty world outside. Dr. Emil Sanderson, the team leader, was meticulously organizing the equipment when Tom returned, his face flushed with excitement from his interaction with Lyria. "We've got a real opportunity here, Emil," Tom began, shedding his heavy outer layer. "The locals are incredible, especially Lyria. She's offered to show us some of their sacred sites." Emil, a seasoned researcher with a keen interest in alien cultures, looked up from his datapad. "That's excellent news, Tom. But remember, we need to tread carefully. Cultural sensitivity is key." "How was your reception otherwise?" "Curious but cautious. I think they're just as interested in us as we are in them," Tom replied, helping Emil unpack a spectrograph. At that moment, Dr. Jane Liu, the team's biologist, chimed in. She was examining samples under a microscope but seemed tuned into their conversation. "Did you get a sense of how their society functions? Any insights could really help our approach here." "From what I saw, their community is tightly knit, and everything revolves around the ice. It's both a resource and a sacred element, Tom explained, setting up the spectrograph. Emil nodded thoughtfully. We'll need to ensure our research doesn't disrupt their environment or customs. Tom, maybe you and Lyria can guide us on the best practices here. Absolutely, Tom agreed. I think she could be our liaison. The conversation was interrupted by the crackle of the comm system. Team, this is base. We're tracking a storm approaching your location. Be prepared to hunker down if necessary. Emil glanced at a digital display showing weather patterns. Let's set up the remote sensors today then. The sooner we gather data, the better we can adapt to conditions. I'll grab the gear, Jane offered, standing quickly. Tom nodded, grabbing his coat again. I'll go tell Lyria about the storm. It might be a good test to see how they handle these conditions. Good idea, Emil replied, checking his own gear. Stay on comms and be safe out there. Bundled up once more, Tom made his way back to the village, finding Lyria where he left her, still near the ice library. Lyria, there's a storm coming, Tom announced as he approached. How do you usually prepare for these conditions? Lyria looked towards the darkening horizon, then back at Tom. We use the ice. Protects us as much as it challenges us. Come, I will show you. Together, they walked through the village, Lyria pointing out various community preparations. Thick ice barricades being erected, and supplies being secured. Your community works efficiently, Tom observed, impressed by the rapid response. It's necessary for survival, Lyria explained. The ice gives us life, but it demands respect in return. Tom nodded, understanding the delicate balance of life on Zarithia. In a way, it's beautiful how you've turned adversity into advantage. Lyria smiled slightly. Perhaps you will learn to see the ice as we do, not just as a barrier, but as a shield. As they worked alongside the Borealix, securing the research equipment, Tom felt a newfound respect for the alien culture. He was no longer just a visitor. He was a participant in their world, learning from them not just about the ice, but about what it meant to live harmoniously with one's environment. Chapter 3, First Contact. Tom found himself standing in front of the Borealix Cultural Hall, a gleaming ice structure that refracted sunlight into dazzling arrays. He glanced nervously at the doors as his colleagues finished unloading the last of the equipment crates. Emil stepped over, giving Tom an encouraging clap on the shoulder. Remember, Tom, just be yourself. You've already made a positive impression. This gathering is a chance to deepen that connection, Emil said, adjusting the thermal collar on his coat. Right? Tom replied, still uncertain. He tugged at his gloves. I just hope I don't say the wrong thing. You've done your homework, Jane added from the side as she checked the crate inventory. And hey, if things get awkward, ask about their carving techniques. That's what I did yesterday, and they wouldn't stop talking about it. The hall's doors opened slowly, and Lyria emerged. She motioned for the team to follow. The elders are ready to receive you, she said, her voice calm, yet edged with what Tom thought might be anticipation. Inside, the temperature seemed even lower, but the air felt heavier with significance. The walls were lined with intricate carvings that seemed to shift in the light. The Borealix elders, tall and angular, stood in a semicircle, their crystalline features catching the faint glow of the room's central ice column. Each elder wore a robe that appeared woven from fine ice threads, the pattern so delicate that Tom marveled at how they hadn't shattered. Emil took the lead, bowing his head. Honored elders of Zarithia, we thank you for welcoming us into your hall. We are here in the spirit of collaboration, to learn from your world and to share knowledge from ours. One of the elders stepped forward, their voice deep and resonant. You are here as guests. What is it that your people seek among the ice? Tom felt Lyria glance at him, and on an impulse, he stepped forward slightly. We wish to understand how your people live in harmony with this environment. Your ways are unique, and we hope to learn so that our worlds can benefit from your wisdom. And perhaps in return, we may offer something of value to you. The elder paused, their expression unreadable. Another elder finally spoke. We will observe your actions and intentions, Trust is not given freely among the Borealics. Lyria took a step closer to Tom, speaking in her people's language, her words directed at the elders. Tom could only catch snippets, but her tone was steady, respectful. After a moment, the elders nodded and began speaking quietly among themselves. When Lyria turned back to Tom, her voice was soft. They are cautious, but they are willing to allow further interaction. I will guide you and your team through the ice caverns tomorrow. They wish to see how you treat our sacred spaces. Emil smiled and gave a slight bow. We appreciate this opportunity and will tread carefully. As the elders retreated further into the hall, the team exited, the air outside feeling lighter despite the biting chill. Emil turned to Tom. Nice job in there. You spoke well. And it looks like you've made a strong ally in Lyria. Tom glanced at her, noticing how the light caught on her crystalline skin. He smiled. I just hope I can keep up with the trust she's showing in us. Lyria, overhearing, nodded slightly. You'll have your chance. The ice will show who you truly are. The group returned to their base, preparing for the next day's expedition. As they worked side by side, Tom found himself asking Lyria questions about her people's customs, the meanings behind their carvings, and how they viewed outsiders. Lyria answered patiently, and slowly, they began to develop an understanding. Though still wary, Lyria seemed to open up a bit more with each passing hour. And as Tom listened, he couldn't help but feel a growing connection to her and her people. This wasn't just research anymore. It was something deeper, something that challenged his understanding of what it meant to bridge two very different worlds. Chapter 4. The Language of Warmth. The icy cavern echoed with the crunch of boots on frost-covered stone as Tom followed Lyria through the twisting passages. The air inside was colder than anything he'd experienced back on Earth, but he didn't mind. He had bundled up well, and he was too captivated by the cavern's beauty to focus on the temperature. The walls shimmered in the light of their headlamps, refracting colors that danced and shifted with every step. Felt like stepping into a living, breathing crystal. Why does it glow like that? Tom asked, gesturing at the brilliant walls. Lyria glanced back at him, her crystalline features catching the glimmer of the ice. These formations contain trace minerals that interact with light. Over time, they form patterns we call sky shards. Some say they mirror the stars, though that is more poetry than science. Poetry? Tom chuckled. I wouldn't have guessed that from you, Lyria. She arched a delicate brow, her sharp-edged cheek catching the light. And why not? Well, I thought your people were more. Tom hesitated, searching for the right word. Practical. Lyria stopped walking and turned to face him. You assume that because we live in the cold, we have no art or beauty. Practicality and poetry are not exclusive, human. Tom held up his hands, palms out. Fair point. I didn't mean to offend you. You didn't? Lyria said, though there was a flicker of amusement in her tone. You simply have much to learn. They continued deeper into the cavern, the air growing sharper, almost biting. Tom noticed how Lyria moved with ease despite the cold. He'd read that Borealic's bodies didn't retain heat the same way humans did, but seeing it in person was different. Her movements were fluid, confident, as if she was as much a part of the ice as the walls themselves. I can't imagine not feeling the cold, Tom said after a long silence. Even with all this gear, I'm still freezing. Feeling cold would be a distraction, Lyria replied simply. We are taught to focus on what matters. But you never feel warm either? He pressed. Not even, I don't know, close to a fire or under a sun lamp. No, she said without looking back. Not in the way you describe warmth. I can sense changes in temperature, but it is not comforting. Tom frowned, trying to imagine a life without that basic comfort. Is that why you look at me like I'm some kind of anomaly? Because I can feel warmth? Lyria paused and turned to him, her gaze steady. It is not just your warmth that sets you apart, Tom. It is your curiosity, your persistence. You are not like most humans I have encountered. Have you met many? Enough, she said cryptically. He couldn't tell if that was a compliment or a warning. Either way, he was intrigued. He fell silent as they reached a chamber larger than the rest, its walls covered in carvings that seemed to ripple as their light touched them. "This is one of our oldest sites," Lyria said, running her fingers lightly along the etchings. "Here, we record not just our history, but our hopes and dreams. In these carvings, you will find stories of unity, conflict, and connection." Tom stepped closer, studying the lines and patterns. "Connection." Lyria hesitated, her hand resting on the ice. "We do not feel warmth as you do, but we do feel bonds. They are rare, but when we form them, they are unbreakable." These carvings tell of those bonds between Borealics, between our kind and others. It is not a common thing, but it is possible. Tom's breath misted in the air as he absorbed her words. "So you believe there's something to learn from humans?" "I believe there is something to learn from all beings," Lyria said. "Even you." The corner of Tom's mouth lifted in a small smile. "I guess I should feel honored." "Do not let it go to your head," she replied, but her tone was lighter. They stood there for a while longer, Tom tracing the carvings with his eyes, while Lyria quietly explained their meanings. For the first time, he felt a shift in the dynamic between them. Lyria wasn't just guiding him anymore. She was sharing something personal, something deeply rooted in her culture. And in return, Tom found himself wanting to understand not just the Borealics, but Lyria herself. "Thank you for showing me this," he said finally. "It means a lot." Lyria glanced at him, her expression inscrutable. "You are willing to learn. That means more than you realize." As they began the trek back, Tom couldn't help but feel that something had changed. Lyria's words lingered in his mind, and for the first time, he started to see the Borealics not just as subjects of study, but as individuals with a depth and complexity he hadn't fully appreciated before. Chapter 5: The Touch. The icy air nipped at Tom's face as he followed Lyria into the sprawling cavern. This was the largest formation he'd seen yet, its crystalline walls soaring upward and branching like a frozen cathedral. Each step echoed, blending into the low hum of wind that found its way through the narrow crevices. "Where are we going this time?" Tom asked, adjusting his hood against the chill. "To the Crystal Heart," Lyria replied. Her voice was steady, but there was a faint lilt that Tom hadn't noticed before. It sounded almost expectant. "It is the core of this formation and holds the oldest carvings in our region." He nodded, picking up his pace to match hers. "Are there any special rules I should know before we get there?" Lyria glanced back at him, her crystalline features catching the dim light. "Do not touch the carvings. Respect the space. That is all." Tom gave a small, reassuring smile. "Got it." As they moved deeper, the light from their headlamps seemed to grow more diffuse, refracted by the densely packed crystals. Lyria reached out, her hand brushing lightly against the wall to guide their way. Tom noticed how effortlessly she moved, even in the near darkness. He marveled at how her kind seemed so perfectly attuned to their environment, while he relied entirely on human-made equipment to keep from freezing solid. They reached a wide ledge that overlooked a cavern floor below. In the center stood a single massive crystal, smooth and perfectly cylindrical, glowing faintly from within. The light shifted as if something alive was moving inside it. Around its base, dozens of carvings spiraled upward, wrapping around the column in intricate patterns. "This is it," Lyria said, her voice hushed. "The Crystal Heart. It is said to be older than any other formation in this region, and it is still growing." Tom stepped closer, examining the carvings. "These patterns, they look different from the others we've seen." "They are different," Lyria explained. "These tell a story of our people's connection to the ice. It is not just a record, but a reminder of who we are and what sustains us." Tom tilted his head. "So it's more than just history. It's part of your identity." "Exactly," Lyria said, her tone softening. "The ice is our lifeblood, our home. Without it, we would not exist." He stared at the glowing crystal for a moment, his breath misting in the air. "Do you ever wonder what it's like to be somewhere else? Somewhere warm, Lyria was silent for a moment. It is not something I think about often. Warmth is an idea I cannot truly comprehend. I see it in you and your kind, but I do not feel it as you do. Tom turned to look at her. Not even when you're close to someone? Like another Borealix. She met his gaze, her crystalline skin shimmering faintly. Physical closeness is different for us. It is not warmth as you understand it. It is proximity, nothing more. Tom felt a pang of sympathy. He couldn't imagine not feeling the comfort of warmth. I wish I could explain it better, he said. It's not just heat. It's the way it makes you feel safe, connected. Like you're not alone. Lyria tilted her head slightly, considering his words. You describe it as though it is an emotion, not merely a physical sensation. It's both, Tom said. That's what makes it so important. They stood there in silence for a while, the faint glow of the crystal heart casting soft light over them. Then, as if on a whim, Tom reached out his hand, hesitating just before it made contact with her arm. May I? Lyria looked at his hand, then at his face. Why do you wish to touch me? I want to see if you can feel it, he said, his voice quiet. If you don't want me to, I won't. She studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she gave a small nod. You may try. Tom gently placed his gloved hand on her forearm. At first she didn't react. But then her crystalline skin seemed to catch the faint warmth from his hand, and her eyes widened slightly. It is different. He withdrew his hand quickly, not wanting to push the moment. What do you mean? I felt something, she said. Couldn't help feeling that the brief moment of contact had shifted something between them. Lyria's guarded demeanor seemed to soften, and while her words were still measured, her tone held a hint of curiosity that hadn't been there before. As they made their way back to the surface, Tom glanced at her and asked, Lyria, do you think that feeling, whatever it was, might be what we call warmth? She looked thoughtful. Perhaps. I will need time to understand it. But for now, I will say this. It was not unpleasant. Tom grinned. That's good enough for me. Chapter 6. Exploring Warmth. Lyria hesitated just inside the crystalline archway, the frost catching in her pale, shimmering hair. Her sharp, angular features remained unreadable, but her hands rested stiffly at her sides, betraying a tension she rarely showed. Across from her, Tom stood in his insulated jacket, shifting his weight between his boots and rubbing his hands together to keep them warm. Are you certain this is necessary? She asked, her voice steady, though she avoided looking directly at him. Tom shrugged, his breath fogging in the cold. I don't know if it's necessary, but it's something I think we should try. You said you've never felt warmth the way humans do. Maybe if we take a closer approach, we'll learn something new. Lyria tilted her head slightly. I felt something the last time when you touched my arm. It was not warmth, but different. Why would repeating it change the result? Because it wasn't just about the sensation, Tom explained, stepping a bit closer. Sometimes what matters isn't just the first reaction, but what happens after you've experienced it more than once. It might feel different the second time or the third. Lyria glanced past him, as though searching for an argument in the patterns of light playing on the icy walls. Finally, she nodded. I will follow your lead. Tom smiled gently. Okay, let's start small. He pulled off one glove and offered her his hand. Take my hand, and let's see what you notice. She hesitated only briefly before reaching out. Her fingers, pale and crystalline, brushed his palm lightly. For a moment there was no reaction. Then her brow furrowed, and her fingers tightened slightly around his. There is, she paused, as though searching for the right words. There is a kind of energy. It is not heat, but it is not nothing. It is as though I am aware of your presence more sharply. Tom nodded. That's a good way of putting it. And if you hold on longer, it might become more noticeable. Lyria kept her hand on his, and after several moments, she spoke again. It is still not warmth as you describe it, but I can feel connection. I do not know if it is the same, but it is not unpleasant. Encouraged, Tom said, Okay, let's try one more thing. I'll put my hand on your shoulder, and you tell me if it changes anything." She nodded once, and Tom slowly reached out, resting his hand on her shoulder. He could feel the cold of her crystalline skin even through his jacket sleeve, but he also noticed how still she became. Her expression softened slightly, and her head tilted as if she were listening to something far away. "It is different again," she said softly. "More than before. I feel as though I can sense your heartbeat. No, not your heartbeat itself, but something of you that is alive, near me." "That's good," Tom said quietly. "It's not exactly what I'd call warmth, but it's closer, right?" "Closer," she agreed. Her voice carried a faint note of wonder. "I did not think something so simple could feel significant." They stood there for a moment longer, neither speaking. Tom finally stepped back, giving her space. "I don't want to push too far. You should take your time with this." Lyria regarded him thoughtfully. "You are more cautious than most humans I have known. I appreciate that." Tom chuckled. "I just don't want to ruin a good thing. You're trusting me, and I want to respect that." She folded her hands in front of her, her crystalline fingers catching the dim light. "Perhaps we could continue this exploration, not only of what you call warmth, but of the ways in which humans and Borealics perceive the same experience differently." Tom smiled. "I'd like that. I think there's a lot we can learn from each other." They began walking back toward the village together, their steps echoing faintly in the cavern. Along the way, they continued to talk, not only about the sensations Lyria had experienced, but also about the larger differences between their species. Lyria explained more about her people's traditions and how they viewed physical contact. Tom shared stories of Earth and how touch and warmth played a central role in human relationships. By the time they reached the village, there was a new openness between them. Lyria seemed less hesitant, and Tom found himself looking forward to their next meeting, not just as an opportunity for scientific discovery, but as a chance to deepen a connection he was only just beginning to understand. Chapter 7: The Cultural Exchange. The ice cavern opened into a massive, domed chamber, its walls etched with intricate carvings. Hundreds of small crystals caught the pale light from above, scattering it into brilliant shards that danced across the frozen floor. At the center of the room stood a gathering of Borealics, their crystalline forms gleaming as they moved in practiced coordination. It was the first time the humans had been invited to such a ceremonial event, and Tom felt the weight of the occasion as he and his team carefully made their way inside. Lyria stood at the edge of the gathering, her usual composed demeanor unshaken. She looked to Tom and gestured for him to join her. "The elders will speak soon. It is customary to listen before asking questions." Tom nodded, adjusting the translator device in his ear. "Got it. Thanks for letting us be here, Lyria." "You are guests of my people," she said simply. "It is only right." Emil and Jane, standing behind Tom, glanced at one another before stepping closer. Emil leaned in and murmured, "This is big. If we handle this right, it could open the door to all kinds of cooperation. Or close it if we screw it up," Jane whispered back, half smiling to take the edge off her words. Tom glanced over his shoulder. "Let's just keep our focus on learning and respecting their customs. Lyria's trusted us so far. Let's not give her any reason to regret it." The murmurs among the Borealics quieted as an elder stepped forward, their long, flowing robe glimmering with woven patterns that refracted light like a prism. The elder's voice carried through the chamber, clear and resonant. Although Tom couldn't understand the words without the translator's assistance, the tone was unmistakable, welcoming but firm. "The elder is explaining the purpose of this ceremony," Lyria said softly, standing close enough that her voice didn't carry beyond Tom's group. "It is a time of reflection and sharing knowledge. You will be invited to speak, but only after the elder has finished." Tom nodded, listening intently. When the elder finished their address, a younger Borealix stepped forward and began to translate for the human visitors. "The elder welcomes you, human researchers, to this sacred space. They have expressed their willingness to hear about your world and your intentions." Emil stepped forward, his expression earnest. "We come here to understand, to learn from your people and your environment. We believe there is much we can share with one another. It is our hope that through this exchange, we can foster a mutual understanding and appreciation for each other's ways. There was a murmur of acknowledgement among the Borealics. Tom noticed a few glances directed his way, some curious, others guarded. He took a deep breath and added, "We've already learned so much from Lyria. She's been an incredible guide. We want to continue building on that, to find common ground and maybe even work together in ways that benefit us all." Lyria's expression didn't change, but her crystalline features caught the light as she inclined her head slightly, a subtle acknowledgement of Tom's words. The elder spoke again, their tone measured. The translator continued, "The elder says they appreciate your honesty and your efforts to understand our ways. They will allow you to observe our ceremonies and our daily lives, so long as you remain respectful and do not disrupt our traditions." Tom smiled, relieved. "We're grateful for this opportunity." As the formal proceedings concluded, the Borealics began mingling in small groups, discussing what had been said. Lyria turned to Tom. "That went well. The elders are cautious, but they see potential in cooperation. You presented yourself in a way they respect." "Thanks," Tom said. "I couldn't have done it without your help. They listen to you and they trust your judgment. That means a lot." Lyria's gaze lingered on him for a moment, her sharp features catching the refracted light. "You have been honest in your intentions. That is why they are willing to listen. My people value truth, even when it is inconvenient." "Then we'll keep being honest," Tom said. "We're not here to take anything from you. We just want to understand and work together." Lyria nodded. "And that is why I will continue to help you." As the evening wore on, the humans and Borealics found themselves exchanging small gestures of trust. Jane spoke with a Borealics artisan about their ice carving techniques, while Emil examined a set of ancient carvings under the guidance of a local historian. Tom, however, stayed near Lyria, asking her questions about the cultural significance of the ceremony and the meanings behind the carvings on the walls. "Some of these patterns tell of alliances," Lyria explained, her voice low. "Moments when different Borealics tribes came together, despite their differences, to create something lasting." Tom studied the carvings, his gloved fingers tracing the air just above the surface. "It's beautiful. It must have taken so much care and trust to make something like this." "Yes," Lyria said. "Trust is not given lightly, but when it is earned, it is unbreakable." Their conversation gradually shifted, becoming less formal and more personal. Tom asked Lyria about her life before she became a guide, and she asked him about Earth's landscapes and what it felt like to stand under a warm sun. The more they talked, the more the gap between their species seemed to narrow, at least for a little while. Chapter 8: Acceptance and Affection. As the sun dipped below the jagged horizon of Zarithia, the air turned sharper, and the faint shimmer of the ice-covered cliffs grew more pronounced. Tom adjusted his jacket and turned to Lyria, who stood beside him with her usual composed stance, gazing at the soft glow of the crystal formations. "This is the last site on our list," Tom said, nodding toward the sprawling crystalline field in front of them. "If the readings match the ones from the other locations, we'll have enough data for the first phase of the project." Lyria's crystalline features caught the low light, her expression unreadable as usual. "Your efforts here have been thorough. The elders have noticed." "Good to know," Tom replied, watching as she carefully stepped onto the ice. He followed, his boots crunching softly against the frosted surface. "And what about you? What have you noticed?" Lyria glanced at him. "I have noticed that you are persistent. You seek understanding, not just data. That is rare." Tom chuckled, the sound misting in the cold. "I guess that's one way of putting it. But it's more than just curiosity. The more time I spend here, the more I realize how much we have to learn from each other. This planet, your people, it's unlike anything I've ever known." They stopped at the base of a large crystal formation, its surface lined with intricate carvings. Tom knelt down, carefully setting up a sensor. As he worked, he asked, "Lyria, do you ever think about what it would be like to visit other planets? Places warmer than this?" She paused, her hands lightly brushing over the carvings. I have thought about it, she admitted, but I am not sure I would understand it. Warmth is not something I feel naturally. I would not know how to adapt. Tom finished positioning the sensor and straightened, looking at her thoughtfully. It's not just about the temperature. Warmth is also how we connect, how we make each other feel safe, close. I think you'd understand it pretty quickly. Her head tilted slightly, her gaze meeting his. You seem certain. I am, Tom said simply. They continued to work in silence for a while, the hum of the equipment and the occasional crack of shifting ice the only sounds. Once the sensor was secure, they began the walk back toward the village. As they neared the outskirts, the glow of the Borealic's dwellings came into view, their crystalline structures reflecting the deep blue of the encroaching night. You've been more open with me lately, Tom said after a moment. It feels like you trust me more. Lyria hesitated. I have seen that you are sincere. Trust is not given lightly among my people. But you have earned it. Tom stopped, turning to face her. I'm glad to hear that. I feel the same about you. She studied him for a long moment, the crystalline facets of her face catching the faint light. Do humans always speak so openly about their emotions? Not always, Tom admitted, his breath visible in the cold air. But when we feel something important, we try to share it. It helps us connect. Lyria considered his words, then stepped closer. Perhaps that is something we could learn from you. They stood there, the silence stretching out between them. Tom, emboldened by her openness, reached out his hand. May I? She looked down at his hand, then back at him. What are you asking? To hold your hand, he said softly. If you're okay with it. Her fingers, delicate yet sharp-edged, brushed against his palm. For a moment, she hesitated, then placed her hand in his. It was cool to the touch, but as their fingers intertwined, Tom felt a subtle shift. Her crystalline skin didn't warm, but the contact felt meaningful, almost intimate. Lyria's voice was quiet. I can feel your presence more clearly now. It is not unpleasant. Tom smiled, squeezing her hand gently. That's all I could hope for. They walked the rest of the way hand in hand, the glow of the Borealic's village growing brighter. By the time they reached the edge of the settlement, Tom could feel the weight of the moment, as though something important had shifted between them. Lyria turned to him before they entered. Thank you, Tom, she said, for showing me what I could not see before. He smiled. Thank you for trusting me. Without another word, they entered the village, their steps silent on the ice. But even in the cold, Tom felt a kind of warmth he couldn't quite explain, one that came from knowing he had made a connection that would stay with him long after the icy winds of Zarithia had faded into memory.